The boardroom was silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence that follows a successful presentation. This was the suffocating, knife-edge quiet that comes right before your world implodes. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs as I sat there, staring at the man who was about to destroy everything I had worked for. "Vivian," Greg said, his voice dripping with that condescending tone I had grown to despise over the years. "We need to talk." I knew. God, I knew what was coming. The signs had been there for weeks. The hushed conversations that stopped when I entered the room. The meetings I was suddenly not invited to. The way my ideas were dismissed with a wave of his hand, labeled as too much or overly sentimental. But knowing and experiencing are two entirely different beasts. "You are just not cutthroat enough," Greg continued, his fingers drumming impatiently on the mahogany table. "Leadership requires less feeling, more force. You care too much about people, and frankly, it is becoming a liability." A liability. 5 years of my life. 5 years of climbing the corporate ladder at Northwave Tech, breaking barriers, mentoring younger employees, and pushing for innovations that put people first. 5 years of being told I was too passionate in meetings, too empathetic with staff, too emotional for the cold, calculating world of technology leadership. And now, just 6 months after being shortlisted for vice president, they were throwing me away like yesterday's coffee. "I do not understand," I managed to whisper, though my voice felt foreign to my own ears. "My performance reviews have been outstanding. The team respects me. Our department's productivity has increased by 30% since I took over." Greg's laugh was sharp, cutting through my defenses like a blade. "Numbers are not everything, Vivian. You lack the killer instinct. You spend too much time worrying about work-life balance and employee satisfaction surveys. This is not a charity. This is business." The words hit me like physical blows. Each syllable was designed to diminish, to make me smaller, to convince me that my greatest strengths were actually my most fatal flaws. "Effective immediately, your position has been terminated," he said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "Security will escort you out. Please ensure all company property is returned." No warning. No severance package. No acknowledgement of the blood, sweat, and tears I had poured into making Northwave Tech a better place for everyone who walked through its doors. Just a generic termination letter and the cold, clinical efficiency of corporate dismissal. I stood up on shaking legs, my entire body trembling with a mixture of rage, humiliation, and devastating heartbreak. The small succulent plant on my desk suddenly seemed like the most important thing in the world. It was the only thing in that sterile office that had any life in it, any warmth. As I walked through the corridors for the last time, cradling that plant like a lifeline, I could feel the stairs burning into my back. Some faces showed sympathy. Others displayed barely concealed relief that they had survived another round of corporate culling. But behind the tears that threatened to spill down my cheeks, something else was growing. Something fierce and unforgiving. They thought my emotions made me weak. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The fire in my chest refused to die. For weeks after the termination, I found myself waking up at 3 in the morning, my mind racing with plans, strategies, and a burning need to prove that their assessment of me had been catastrophically incorrect. What Greg and his clipboard-wielding cronies failed to understand was that my too much had always been my secret weapon. While they were busy playing political games and stabbing each other in the back, I had been building relationships. Real, meaningful connections with the most talented individuals in the industry. The women who had been passed over for promotions despite their brilliant ideas. The men who were labeled as too soft because they actually cared about their team's well-being. The neurodivergent geniuses who saw the world differently and could solve problems in ways that conventional thinking never could. These were the people I reached out to first when I decided to launch Lumacore. "Vivian, are you serious about this?" asked Zara, one of the most brilliant developers I had ever worked with. She had been systematically overlooked at her current company because she refused to compromise her values for the sake of profit margins. "Dead serious," I replied, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was proposing. "We are going to build something different. A tech consultancy that puts human-first philosophy at the center of everything we do. Compassion-led innovation that actually works." The skepticism in her voice was understandable. But what about funding? Office space? Clients who will actually take us seriously? I smiled for the first time in weeks. Leave that to me. I have been saving for years, and I know exactly which clients are frustrated with the current market offerings. Trust me, there is a hunger for what we are going to provide. Within 6 weeks of my termination, Lumicore was officially launched from my garage-turned-office. By month 3, we had our first major client. By month 6, we had outgrown the garage and moved into a beautiful space in downtown Seattle, complete with natural lighting, comfortable collaboration areas, and yes, plenty of plants. But it was not just about the physical space. It was about creating an environment where emotional intelligence was valued, where empathy was seen as a strategic advantage, where caring about people's well-being translated directly into innovative solutions and sustainable growth. Our team worked differently. We took time to understand not just what our clients needed, but why they needed it. We looked at the human impact of every decision, every line of code, every strategic recommendation. And the results spoke for themselves. 18 months later, Lumicore was leading product development for Fortune 500 companies. We had become the go-to consultancy for organizations that wanted to innovate without sacrificing their humanity. Our client satisfaction rates were through the roof. Our employee retention was nearly 100%. We were featured in industry publications as pioneers of a new approach to technology leadership. Meanwhile, Northwave Tech was struggling. I watched from a distance as they lost contract after contract. Their employee turnover reached critical levels. The toxic culture that Greg had cultivated was finally catching up with them, and the market was responding accordingly. But here is the thing they never suspected. I was not just a passive observer of their downfall. Remember that major contract they had been pursuing for 2 years? The one worth 8 figures that would have secured their financial stability for the next decade? Well, it turns out the decision-makers at that company valued human-centered approaches to technology implementation. And when they asked around the industry for recommendations on who could deliver what they needed, my name came up consistently. I did not actively sabotage Northwave's bid. I simply provided what the client was looking for, and it became crystal clear that their old-school, profit-above-people approach was not going to cut it in the evolving market. When they lost that contract to us, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge, and everything to do with validation. The market was proving what I had always known. Emotional intelligence is not a weakness. It is a competitive advantage. Then came the opportunity one had been unconsciously preparing for my entire career. "Vivian, you need to see this," my assistant Kai said, bursting into my office with an expression I had never seen before. "Northwave Tech is quietly being put up for acquisition. The board is looking for buyers." My heart stopped. The company that had discarded me like trash was now vulnerable, financially bleeding, desperately seeking someone to save them from their own toxic leadership. The irony was so perfect it felt like the universe's way of delivering cosmic justice. "What kind of time frame are we looking at?" I asked, my mind already racing through possibilities. "The board wants to move quickly. They are hemorrhaging money and talent. From what I can gather, they are hoping for a quick sale to a larger corporation that can absorb their debts and restructure." I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Seattle. Somewhere out there, in a sterile office building, Greg was probably having emergency meetings about how to save the company he had helped destroy with his backward leadership philosophy. "Kai, I want you to put together a comprehensive analysis of Northwave's current financial position. Assets, debts, intellectual property, everything. I also want detailed profiles on every current executive and board member." "Are you thinking what I think you are thinking?" Kai asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned back to face him, and I could see my reflection in his wide eyes. There was something different about me now. Something that had been forged in the fire of rejection, and tempered by the success I had built from the ashes of my former career. I am thinking that it is time to show them what emotional leadership can really accomplish. The acquisition process took 4 months. For months of careful planning, strategic maneuvering, and the kind of detailed preparation that only someone with deep emotional investment could sustain. Lumacore had grown large enough and profitable enough to secure the necessary financing. Our reputation in the industry opened doors that might have remained closed to other potential buyers. And most importantly, our human-first approach had created a network of allies who were more than willing to support what we were trying to accomplish. The Northwave board never saw it coming. They were expecting a faceless conglomerate or a private equity firm. They were prepared to negotiate with cold, calculating business entities that would strip the company for parts or absorb it into a larger corporate machine. What they got was me. The day of the final acquisition meeting, I chose my outfit carefully. A midnight blue dress that commanded respect without being aggressive. The velvet heels I had worn to my first presentation at Northwave 5 years earlier. And yes, my favorite pen. The one Greg had once dismissed as too girly during a particularly condescending meeting. I walked into that boardroom like I owned it. Because in a few hours I would. The expressions on their faces when I entered were worth every sleepless night. Every moment of doubt. Every tear I had shed in the months following my termination. Greg went pale. Actually pale, like all the blood had drained from his face. "Vivian," he stammered. "I did not realize you were involved in this acquisition." "Surprise," I said calmly, taking my seat at the head of the table. "I hope you do not mind that I brought my own legal team. I want to make sure we get all the details exactly right." The next 3 hours were a masterclass in professional satisfaction. Every contract clause, every employee protection agreement, every strategic decision was negotiated with the same emotional intelligence and attention to human impact that had made Lumacore so successful. But I was not there for revenge. I was there for transformation. When the papers were signed and Northwave Tech officially became part of the Lumacore family, I did not gloat. Instead, I scheduled individual meetings with every executive to discuss the transition. Most of them were terrified. They knew their leadership style was incompatible with everything I stood for, and they were expecting immediate termination. I gave them something they had never given me, a chance to explain themselves and an opportunity to adapt. "Look," I told each of them, "I am not interested in burning everything down. I am interested in building something better. If you can embrace a leadership approach that values emotional intelligence, empathy, and human-centered decision-making, there is a place for you in this new version of the company." Some of them rose to the challenge. They genuinely worked to unlearn toxic behaviors and embrace a more collaborative, emotionally intelligent approach to leadership. Others could not make the transition. Greg was one of them. 2 weeks after the acquisition, he asked to meet with me privately. I could see the desperation in his eyes, the recognition that his old way of doing business was not going to survive in the new environment. "Vivian, I was wondering if there might be a place for me in an advisory capacity," he said, his voice lacking any of the confidence and condescension that had characterized our previous interactions. "I have been with this company for 10 years. I know the systems, the clients, the history." I looked at him for a long moment, remembering the day he had destroyed my career with such casual cruelty. "Greg," I said gently, "this company needs vision, not revision. We are building something completely new here, something that requires leaders who understand that emotional intelligence is not a liability. It is our greatest asset." His termination letter was printed on high-quality pink paper, hand-delivered with my signature and a subtle hint of my favorite perfume. It was not petty. It was poetic. 6 months after the acquisition, Northwave Tech was unrecognizable. We had transformed the entire company culture from the ground up. The sterile, competitive environment that had driven away so much talent was replaced with collaborative spaces designed to foster creativity and human connection. Employee satisfaction scores went through the roof. Productivity increased by 40%. Client retention reached levels the company had never achieved under previous leadership. But the real transformation was not in the numbers. It was in the people. I remember walking through the offices one evening and overhearing a conversation between 2 developers who had been with the company since before the acquisition. "I actually look forward to coming to work now," one of them was saying. "Can you believe that? For the first time in years, I feel like my ideas matter, like my well-being matters." "I know what you mean," the other replied. "Remember how we used to joke that emotions were banned in this building? Now emotional intelligence is literally part of our performance evaluations. That conversation meant more to me than any profit report or industry recognition ever could. The Harvard Business Review feature came 8 months later. Empathy as Strategy: How Lumacor's acquisition of Northwave Tech redefined industry leadership became one of their most read case studies that year. The article detailed how emotional intelligence and human-centered leadership had not only saved a failing company, but transformed it into an industry leader. It analyzed our approach to change management, employee engagement, and client relations. But what I treasured most was a quote from one of our junior developers, someone who had been overlooked and undervalued under the previous leadership. Working here now feels like being part of something bigger than profit margins. We are creating technology that actually makes people's lives better, and we are doing it in an environment where caring about each other is seen as a strength, not a weakness. My new office had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Seattle waterfront. Natural light flooded in throughout the day, a stark contrast to the fluorescent-lit cave I had worked in as an employee. On my desk, next to family photos and strategic planning documents, I kept 2 things. The small succulent plant I had carried out on my last day as an employee, now thriving in a beautiful ceramic pot, and a framed photograph from that day. In the photo, I am walking out of the building with the plant in my arms, my face streaked with tears but my jaw set with determination. Except now I was holding keys. Keys to the building, keys to the future, keys to proving that everything they had said about my emotions being a liability was catastrophically wrong. The industry took notice. Within a year of the acquisition, Lumacor became the consulting firm that other companies called when they wanted to transform their own toxic cultures. We developed frameworks for emotional intelligence in leadership, created assessment tools for empathy-based hiring, and pioneered approaches to innovation that put human impact at the center of every decision. Our client list grew to include some of the most respected names in technology, healthcare, and sustainable development. Organizations that had previously prioritized profit above all else were discovering that caring about people was not just morally right, it was strategically brilliant. The demand for our services became so high that we expanded into multiple cities, always maintaining the same human-first philosophy that had driven our success. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came during a keynote speech I gave at a major industry conference. They told me I was too emotional to be a leader. I said to an audience of hundreds of executives, many of whom had probably heard similar criticisms of their own leadership styles. They said caring too much was a weakness, that empathy was incompatible with business success. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces hanging on every word. What they did not understand is that emotion, real, genuine human emotion, is not the enemy of strategic thinking. It is the foundation of it. When you truly care about the people you serve, the people you work with, the impact your decisions have on real human lives, you make better choices. You innovate more effectively. You build sustainable success instead of short-term gains. The standing ovation lasted for nearly 5 minutes. But the real victory was not in the applause or the industry recognition. It was in the transformation of individual lives. Zara, the brilliant developer I had recruited in the early days of Lumacor, had been promoted to Chief Technology Officer. Under her leadership, our technical team had developed groundbreaking solutions that were being adopted across multiple industries. "You saved my career," she told me during our annual review meeting. "More than that, you showed me that I did not have to choose between being successful and being human." Kai, my assistant who had become one of our most trusted project managers, had started a mentorship program for young professionals who felt overlooked or undervalued in traditional corporate environments. "I want to make sure no one else has to go through what you went through," he explained. "I want them to know from the beginning that their empathy and emotional intelligence are superpowers, not weaknesses." These stories multiplied across our organization. People who had been told they were too soft or too sensitive were flourishing in an environment that valued their authentic selves. The financial success followed naturally. When you create an environment where people can bring their whole selves to work, where emotional intelligence is valued alongside technical expertise, amazing things happen. Our innovation rate soared. Client satisfaction reached unprecedented levels. Employee retention meant we were not constantly losing institutional knowledge and having to retrain new staff. The company that had once struggled to stay solvent was now posting record profits while maintaining industry-leading employee satisfaction scores. Every quarterly report felt like vindication. Every new contract was proof that the market was hungry for what we offered. Every industry award was validation that emotional leadership was not just effective, it was the future. And every time I signed a new multimillion-dollar contract, I used my favorite pen. The same too girly pen that Greg had once mocked during a team meeting 3 years earlier. The pen he had suggested I replace with something more professional and serious. That pen had signed the acquisition papers that made me the owner of the company that had discarded me. It had signed contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It had signed employment agreements for dozens of talented individuals who had been overlooked by other organizations. Funny how a girly pen could carry so much power. But the real power was never in the pen, just like the real strength was never in spite of my emotions. The power was in understanding that leadership is not about suppressing your humanity. It is about leveraging it strategically, authentically, and with genuine care for the people whose lives you impact. 3 years after walking out with a plant in my arms and tears on my cheeks, I stood in the same building as its owner. The transformation was complete, but the work was ongoing. Every day brought new opportunities to prove that emotional intelligence was not just compatible with business success. It was essential for sustainable growth in an evolving economy. The sterile, competitive environment that had characterized the old Northwave Tech had been replaced with something unprecedented. A workplace where people actually wanted to be, where innovation flourished because psychological safety allowed for creative risk-taking, where success was measured not just in profit margins, but in positive impact on human lives. I thought about Greg sometimes, wondering what he was doing, whether he had learned anything from the experience. I genuinely hoped he had found an environment where his skills could be valuable without requiring him to diminish others. Because that is what emotional leadership taught me. Success is not about destroying your enemies. It is about creating environments where everyone can succeed. The story could end there, with the satisfying narrative of vindication and transformation. But the real impact was just beginning. Lumacor's success had inspired a movement. Other companies were adopting our frameworks. Business schools were incorporating emotional intelligence into their leadership curricula. The next generation of leaders was growing up in a world where caring too much was finally being recognized as caring just enough. The women who had been told they were too emotional were becoming CEOs. The men who had been labeled too soft were revolutionizing entire industries. The neurodivergent individuals who saw the world differently were solving problems that conventional thinking could not touch. Every time I received a message from someone who had been inspired by our story, who had decided to embrace their emotional intelligence instead of suppressing it, I felt the same fire in my chest that had sustained me through those dark weeks after my termination. Except now, that fire was not burning with anger or a need for revenge. It was burning with purpose, with the knowledge that we had proven something important about the future of leadership, about the value of human connection in an increasingly digital world. They said I was too emotional to be a CEO. What they did not understand was that my emotions were not a bug in my leadership operating system. They were a feature. The empathy that made me too soft allowed me to build teams where people felt valued and motivated to do their best work. The passion that made me too intense drove innovation and creative problem-solving that conventional approaches could not achieve. The caring that made me a liability created loyal relationships with clients and employees that became the foundation of sustainable success. Every tear I had shed, every moment of doubt I had experienced, every criticism I had endured had been transformed into strength. Not despite my emotional nature, but because of it. The plant that I had carried out on my last day as an employee now sat in a place of honor in my office, thriving in the natural light that flooded through those floor-to-ceiling windows. It served as a daily reminder that growth is possible, that what appears to be an ending can actually be the beginning of something extraordinary. And every morning when I walked into that building, my building now, I carried with me the knowledge that emotional intelligence had not just saved my career. It had revolutionized an entire industry. The future belonged to leaders who understood that caring too much was exactly the right amount. And I was just getting started. If this story inspired you to embrace your own emotional intelligence and challenge the status quo in your workplace, please subscribe to our channel for more empowering stories of transformation and triumph. Your support helps us share these important messages with others who need to hear that their sensitivity is their superpower. Hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments how you are using your emotions as a strategic advantage in your own career journey.